From the WKYT studios in Lexington, this is Kentucky Newsmakers with Bill Bryant.
Good morning from WKYT News. We hope you're enjoying your weekend. We begin a series of conversations with the candidates for governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky today. The Republican nominee is Matt Bevin. He faces Democratic Attorney General Jack Conway and Independent Drew Curtis in the November 3rd general election. Bevin is making his second bid for office. He lost the Republican primary last year when he challenged Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell. This year, Bevin came out of a four-person field to claim the Republican nomination for governor by just 83 votes. Bevin has run an aggressive campaign in the field this fall. He has not been on paid television as much as his Democratic opponent. We'll talk about a wide range of issues that the next governor is likely to face, including a huge pension debt, education, where the numbers show some improvements, but the state still lags many others, health care and social issues that have sharply divided the state. We'll discuss that. Bevin's 48 years old. He is a former Army officer and is a businessman, and we welcome him to Kentucky Newsmakers. Thanks for coming.
Great to be here with you, Bill. Really is.
Well, after that loss last year in the primary, in which you were pointed at going to Washington and dealing with national issues, yes, this year you decide to run for governor and to try to tackle state issues. Why are you running for governor?
I don't see them as being tremendously different, those issues. They are the very same things that ail us as a nation, ail us as a state. I've had people ask me why I want to be governor, and what I have said, and I mean it with all sincerity, is it's less a function of it being what I want to do and more a function of what I'm willing to do. And they're very different things. They really are. We need more men and women who are willing to step up to truly be public servants, who are willing to lead, not because there's something in it for themselves, not because they've been groomed for it, not because it's their chosen career path. We need men and women who have been in the military, men and women who are business owners, men and women who have and are raising families, who are dealing with the very things that everyone out there is wrestling with, who can step forward and offer themselves for a finite period of time to serve their fellow man and woman and then simply go back to whatever it is that they were doing before that. This is why I'm in this race. I truly think we need men and women that are willing to be public servants.
As you look ahead, and as I understand it, you spoke to a group in Lexington and you talked about if you know people who want to work in an administration to send their information to you. What would a Bevin administration look like? Where do you find the cabinet secretaries, the appointees, all of these people that you would have to very quickly appoint and put in place?
Yes, I mean, they're going to come from the private sector, but then some of them will also have experience in the public sector. People who have been employees of or elected officials in the public arena. It's important to understand that those who say you need to run government like a business probably don't fully understand either government or business. It is a combination of both. They're very distinct from one another. But you need to bring business principles, you know, things like efficiency, economies of scale, outsourcing where necessary, return on investment. These are things that concepts we need to apply to government. But where these folks will come from, some of them are in the private sector right now. Some are retired from the private sector. Some are currently engaged in elected office. Some are formerly elected officials. These are the folks who I'm already speaking with. These are the folks that I'll be surrounding myself with.
So you would concede that it would be important to you to have some people around you who have a pretty good roadmap in Frankfurt as to how things function.
Oh my goodness. They would be like you or I moving to another country and not wanting a guide or a translator or somebody who's lived there or studied that culture to be somebody providing us with information. It would be a foolish thing to do, to assume you're going to come into Frankfurt and immediately do things the way they need to be done without understanding how they currently are done.
Are you intimidated at all by the fast pace by which an incoming governor would have to set up an administration, get a budget proposal out to the legislature in a matter of weeks?
Yes.
You're off
5 weeks. It's 5 weeks between the election and the inauguration. 5 weeks. It's half the time of most other states. And I'm not, because I'll tell you what, I'm anticipating it. I'm out in front of that. I've got a group of folks that are a pre-transition team that are essentially already building the skeleton. For lack of a better analogy, we're putting together the structure upon which we'll then need to flesh out the bones. We'll put the structure together now in advance of winning, and then upon winning, we will then have the structure upon which we will put all the pieces. The transition team itself will probably have 100+ people necessary to get that job done in a short period of time.
The public polling shows that at this point you have a 5-point deficit. Do you have numbers that indicate something else?
I think we're doing a whole lot better than that. That's all I'll say. I like when the perception is that we're a bit down. I would rather people think we're a bit down than just a bit up. It keeps us hungry. It keeps other people a little bit fuller of themselves than perhaps they should be. That very same poll had us down 15% in northern Kentucky as a way to make us down 5% overall. I can assure you there's not a chance that we're down 15% in northern Kentucky. It's just not the case. There were many things about the way that poll was conducted that were not most necessarily accurate, but that said, it was a legitimate enough poll. I'm not worried about it as much as I am about November the 3rd.
Let's talk about some issues. Kentucky is showing some improvement in test scores across the state that have just been released recently. But we all know that major educational challenges remain for the Commonwealth. Do you get there by insisting on more, by spending more, early childhood education, primary, secondary? What's the most important?
All the above, but let me make a quick point back to your comment. While we have seen some general uptick in overall scores, it's important to look at the components behind that. What we are seeing is that the scores of our most vulnerable students, economically, demographically, socioeconomically in particular, are actually falling. Our black students' scores are actually declining. They are not keeping pace. Not only not keeping pace, they're actually rolling over. This should concern us, because the very changes we have made were made in an effort to ensure that all the boats rise with the tide. It is critical that from early childhood education through post-secondary education, that we spend the money necessary. There are two things that will separate us as a state from where we are today to where we need to be, and also from the states around us. And that will be a spending on education and a spending on infrastructure. These two things are critical. We cannot spend less. We need to spend, if anything, more, but certainly no less than what we are spending, but to do it in a more thoughtful and intentional way. With early childhood education, there's a great program being pioneered right now in northern Kentucky between the United Way, Success by Six, and a group called Skyward, where they are pioneering a program to ensure that 3-, 4-, and 5-year-olds are ready to head into school. Right now, they're putting 5,000 kids a year into the public school system in northern Kentucky. 2,800 of them are ready, 2,200 are not. They say that's not acceptable. I agree. The existing program is failing. It's not working. We're spending money. We need to rethink it. It's not a function of cutting. It's a function of reallocating the dollars to get a better return for the taxpayer and a better result for the student.
How do you feel about the Common Core standards that were developed by the various states but are controversial?
They really weren't developed by the various states, and they're controversial because they're pretty faulty in terms of academics. They are standards. They are not a curriculum. But it's important for people to understand a couple of things. Number one, there were only 2 academicians involved in the creation of those standards, only 2 people who had ever spent any time in a classroom. One was a University of Arkansas English professor, the other a math professor from Stanford University. Neither one of them blessed off on these standards. Both said they are not meeting the criteria that we say we set out for. The math professor said, listen, if we actually apply these, we will be at a minimum 2 years behind other industrialized nations. So the only academics simply said these are not working, and yet we pioneered forward. We have turned our teachers into test administrators. We are auditing them to death. We are testing our young people to death multiple times a year against standards. Now, the curriculum is supposedly up to the local school districts and or the states or what have you, and there's some truth in that for now. But the people who apply the tests, the people who create the tests, the people who are paid for the tests, happen to be the largest producer of curriculum in America, Pearson's, the same company. Now, that's their job, to make a profit and do what they see fit. But the bottom line is people should be concerned about any one company hijacking the entire education process, where they get paid for the tests, and they also provide curriculum. Soon enough, the curriculum and the tests will be aligned in ways that people ought to see coming. And I'm not convinced that the results are the best for our students. Massachusetts had the finest standards in America, the finest results in terms of math and English language arts. Let's use programs like that. Replicate the best, copy the best, use high standards, but give our teachers the ability to actually teach, not to be audited, not to be administrators, not suffocated by bureaucracy.
Is the current way that education is set up in Kentucky, though, under the control of the Department of Education, which is not directly under the governor's control? The governor will appoint in this case, there's an Education and Humanities Secretary who runs some programs, but the KDE is under an education commissioner. Kentucky has just hired, appears to be a new and committed to Common Core standards commissioner who is coming in. Do you anticipate some friction there?
Whether there'll be friction, we'll certainly have dialogue and conversation. Let's have a frank assessment about what's working and what isn't. I think at the end of the day, everybody should want the very same thing, and it transcends party. It's not a Democrat or Republican issue. People want young people to be well educated.
You talk about school choice. What does that mean to you?
I mean, to me, we're one of 7 states right now that offers no competition for public education dollars, and yet we're near the bottom of the pack in almost every measurable category as a state, educationally. Obviously, competition is a good thing. It's good in the private sector. If you were buying a new car, you wouldn't want to have to only buy from one car dealer or one particular brand. It's the same when you buy a tie, a suit, or a loaf of bread. It should be no different with something as critical and important as education. So what does it mean? Let's use public education dollars. Let's start, walk before we run. Let's start with public charter schools. Let's give school choice to some of our failing school systems. We have schools that are literally failing in Fayette County and Jefferson County most particularly, but other places as well. Let's allow public teachers with public taxpayer dollars to teach public school students in a public charter school. But change the dynamic. Don't assume that continuing to do everything the same way, but simply throwing more money at it, is going to result in better outcomes.
For college graduates who enter life with this astronomical debt, we tell young adults they need a degree, they need to train for specific jobs, and they spend a lot of money to obtain that degree and then have difficulty in paying off that debt sometimes. Also in Kentucky, an issue that has become very clear is we're not necessarily matching the graduates to the available jobs.
Exactly.
Do you see a way at assessing and getting at that?
Yes, I think the last point is absolutely spot on. We need to stop telling young people that simply any degree, no matter how long it takes you to get it, no matter what it's in, is going to somehow put you on a track to success in life. That's not true. We've been misleading young people. There are many people who don't have a college degree that are doing quite well, frankly, financially, and being productive contributors to their community. And so we need to spend the money we spend in post-secondary education in the state is $1 billion a year. We need outcomes-based funding. We need to use the dollars to incentivize the very things that we say we want. If we want more STEM degrees, let's give dollars to those universities that are graduating young people with those degrees. Let's look at programs like FAME that Toyota has pioneered, where they're bringing young people up to speed and into their workforce, prepared and ready for the jobs of the future. Let's replicate that. Already it is being done to some degree. Let us as a state make an intentional point of pouring into that. Our community and technical colleges are fantastic. Let's give them the same kind of credibility, the same kind of funding, the same kind of focus that we are giving to those that are studying degrees in humanities.
Does the rising cost of tuition at our public institutions concern you?
It does concern me, but I also am concerned by the fact that increasingly all the institutions, public and private, are becoming more and more like country clubs. The reality is very few students will leave these schools and not have an immediate drop in quality of life. What are we really sending as a message? The student lounges have huge TVs and little cappuccino makers, and it's all creature comforts. It should be the opposite. You should get out of college and see an uptick, not a downtick. Very few people in the real world can afford to live like students live on college campuses. We need collectively to rethink how we are approaching the whole education and what kind of a message we're trying to send.
With Matt Bevin, he's the Republican nominee for governor of Kentucky, and we're back with our conversation with him in just a moment here on Kentucky Newsmakers. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. Great to have you along with us. And Matt Bevin, the Republican nominee for governor of the Commonwealth, is with us today. Next week, we will have Democrat Jack Conway and the independent Drew Curtis the following week as we continue our coverage of Campaign 2015. It's interesting out there on the campaign trail, isn't it, when you listen to people?
It is, and we have less than a month to go, but I have driven over 85,000 miles in Kentucky. in the last 2 years. And I have heard from people in every corner of the state, and increasingly people talk about the same things. They talk about social issues. They've come more to the forefront in the last weeks for reasons that we're all aware of, as it relates to marriage, as it relates to life, Planned Parenthood, etc. But in general, people just want better economic opportunity. They want better jobs. They want opportunity for themselves and their young people and their children and grandchildren. I mean, these are the things that Kentuckians care about.
I'll delve back into these issues in a moment. One issue that is a campaign issue, and that is your opponent has insisted that you release your personal income tax returns. Yeah. You have said you do not intend to do that as a candidate?
Yeah.
And
I don't. There's no reason to do so. If it were required, I would do so. It's not required. It has never been required for people to do so. It's a smokescreen.
Is it a transparency, though, that people might see where your money comes from and
no, I mean, that's why we have disclosures. I mean, we do have to disclose every company in which we have any affiliation, any ownership, any company in which we're a fiduciary or sit on any board or have any level of authority. All that is disclosed. All of that is out there. That's where people can determine where any potential conflicts might arise. That's why they are required. This is a smokescreen. Jack Conway is a guy who supports the abortion industry. Jack Conway is a guy who supports, gay marriage and has been, even though 75% of Kentuckians, frankly, feel differently about that. He's a guy who has no plan for the pension crisis. Jack Conway is a guy who has no solution for how we're going to actually create jobs in this state. And so when you are a guy who is very much on the opposite side of where most Kentuckians are on issues that matter to Kentuckians, on the Second Amendment, on any number of these issues, he's not somebody in line with most Kentuckians, and so he creates smokescreens. And this is nothing other than a smokescreen.
You've mentioned the social issues. Let's go ahead and go there. The High Court, of course, ruled that same-sex marriage is legal, and the governor of the Commonwealth ordered or at least advised in a letter, the county clerks in Kentucky to comply with that, and 117 of 120 have. Yes. If you were governor, or at this point, what would you do to handle that? I think you have said executive order. Governor Beshear has said that he couldn't change a statute by executive order.
He's already done so. He's already changed the documents to indicate, male and female, and change it to spouse. So he's not telling you the truth, and nor is Jack Conway. Where was the governor in telling Jack Conway to do his job when he failed to defend the Constitution as it was then written, as the people of Kentucky voted on? It's a double standard, Bill, and this is what I think a lot of people are offended by. And it is the taking of the rights of one. The Supreme Court now has, in fact, ruled that a same-sex couple can be married, and so be it. Fair enough, but the reality is that is a ruling. It is not enabling legislation. The enabling legislation still does not exist. There is no actual legislation to make that the law. That still needs to be done here in Kentucky. What I proposed back in July was remove the county clerk's names from these documents, make them downloadable or picked up in hard copy, let them be solemnized by somebody like a justice of the peace or whoever, filed with the county clerk like a lien, like a deed, like a mortgage, just like any other legal document. Why does the government need to even give permission to two consenting adults for anything? Government wasn't even in the marriage business until 1920s, and they got in for money. They got in because there was money to be made on it. So what I'm saying as governor is my job will be to ensure that everybody has equal protection under the law.
The state has promised its retired state workers and retired teachers a lifetime pension after their careers, but not nearly enough money has been set aside to do that. And the debt estimated at $30 billion or so when you combine the two. It has affected negatively Kentucky's credit rating. It is more difficult to borrow. Where do you come up with the money to catch up on that?
Again, the demographics are working against us. And I would challenge those that you're going to interview to really give you a legitimate plan. Jack Conway has no plan to solve this, and Drew Curtis has a plan that involves giving a credit card to people in Frankfort to tap as a line of credit. That is a crazy solution. I don't trust that Frankfort will be a steward of this. So the point is we've got to change the program for new hires going forward. The only way we can fulfill the promise to our existing employees and our existing retirees is to change it for those who are not yet in the system. When we first set up for KTRS, for example, this system, we had 6, 7, 8, 9 teachers for every retired teacher. Now it's less than 2 to 1. It's unsustainable. It is not possible that we can afford to continue the program, either the defined benefit program or the cash balance program, with a guaranteed rate of return that we went to a couple of years ago.
What about the debt that is already there, though?
It has to be paid for. Again, it's going to. We have an obligation. We have a legal and a moral obligation to fulfill the promise that has been made to folks. I talked to a retiree yesterday, actually, who has been retired now for 7 years. And within 2 years, he had already taken more out as a retiree than all the money he ever paid in. He's 60 years old. He is going to be continuing to pull out for probably decades. These are the types of things that we've got to be thoughtful about. They are going to come at a cost to taxpayers. My point is, let's stop digging deeper into the hole. We need to move for all new hires to a defined contribution plan. Governor
Beshear expanded Medicaid with the stroke of a pen, and nearly 500,000 Kentuckians have health care coverage that they did not have previously. But the federal government is paying all of that until 2017, when Kentucky begins to have to assume a portion of that. Do you feel that Kentucky can pay that bill? Do you think Kentucky should back out of the governor's expansion?
Well, we're already stuck with the expansion he made to some degree. There is a cost that we will bear for those that are currently on Medicaid. I do think we cannot afford the $300 to $400 million for the 10% that will be required. But in reality, Kentucky pays 30% for all the non-expanded Medicaid. The reality is it's going to go to 30% for us for the expanded as well. They're weaning us slowly. If we can't afford $300 to $400 million a year in a tight budget, in a budget where we can't make our pension obligations, where we can't provide our teachers with what they need and our police officers what they need, and patch our holes as they're needed, where are we going to get $1 billion a year if it's 30%?
He said on this program that a future governor could simply end it. Would you?
I will not continue to enroll people at 138% of the federal poverty level as we are currently utilizing Medicaid. That is correct, yes, and I've made that clear from the very beginning. I will not enroll additional people. Those that are in the system will accommodate those. People will need to requalify as time goes on. People don't just get on Medicaid and stay on it for life. There's always a requalification process. But what I'm saying we need to do as a state is apply for 1115 waivers from CMS, a block grant, so that we as a state, as they've done in Indiana, can customize a solution that works well for us. This will allow us to cover more people, probably at an even higher level of the federal poverty level, but with them having skin in the game. As they move up, they have more and more responsibility, more of a vested interest. The idea of people getting something for nothing is a bad idea. It's bad for the state, and it's bad for the individual.
Matt Bevin is with us on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. He's the Republican running for governor. A couple of more issues we'll ask before we go on WKYT in just a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. We're continuing our discussion today with Matt Bevin, the Republican nominee for governor, as we're meeting with each of the candidates who seeks to lead the Commonwealth this year. Mr. Bevin, coal. Does Kentucky coal have a future, particularly given that the regulations are more stringent? The market seems to be decreasing in part as a result of that, as well as other competitive alternatives?
The answer is yes, especially if we stand on our sovereignty as a state and do what we have the ability to do, which is provide cheap utility rates as a result of the fact that we sit on two extraordinary basins. It's important for people to understand that never in the history of the world has there been more consumption of coal than there is today. The coal that is being consumed in the world today exceeds any amount that has ever been consumed in history. It is still the #1 contributor to electricity in the world. The largest in the state. 90% of the lights in this room are powered by coal, 40% nearly in this country. So the bridge from wherever we are to wherever the future might look like of energy policy is going to be built on the back of coal. There are 6 brand new coal-fired power plants being built in Germany right now, one of the most forward-thinking, progressive, alternative energy countries in the world. And so the bottom line is we need coal. We have 2 basins, the Central App Basin and the Illinois Basin. We as a state should take advantage of it. We have a lot of people say they will be a friend of coal. I will not only be a friend of coal, I will fight for coal. I will defend coal. We will mine coal and convert it to electricity in the state, and we as a state will be a stronger beneficiary of this.
Kentucky has a long history of drug problems, and it seems that when we get a handle on one thing, it moves to another. Prescription drugs was attacked. Heroin is being attacked by recent legislation, but we know we have a horrible problem with overdose there, and then there are now new alternatives that are coming in. How does the next governor get at that?
Again, it is like squeezing a balloon. You squeeze it, and then you create a problem in another another area. It's important to restore dignity to people. When people don't have any expectation of them, when they become essentially financial wards of the state, with no expectation for anything, no skin in the game, no vested interest in their own outcomes on any front, then they make bad decisions. You rob a person of their dignity, you take away their humanity. You take a person's humanity, they make inhumane decisions, not only for themselves and their own bodies, but also for those around them. We need stronger economic possibilities for people, more expectation of people. We are innately wired to contribute more to our own livelihoods. And we need to create an environment in a state where we do not have able-bodied working-age men and women with no expectation of them. They have no children, no obligations to do anything except sit at home and make bad decisions. We can do better for people. We need to in order to get more of our people working.
Mr. Bevan, how would you be in a crisis? And this will be our final question, I think, with time. Governor Beshear has faced several natural disasters in his 8 years in office. Other emergencies have come along. How prepared are you to command the National Guard to make split-second, unforeseen decisions, should that be necessary?
I think far better than anyone else in this race. I'm the only one in this race who's ever been the executive of anything. I've been a chief executive. I'm also a former active duty Army officer. I know all about making life and death decisions in a timely manner. I mean, this is what I have been trained to do. It's what I've done in both the public and private sectors. I'm also the former chair of the board for the American Red Cross for this region of the country. So when Gustav came through, I was the chair of the board when we had to marshal and create an environment to bring 1,500 people from other states here to Kentucky. When we had the tornadoes come through West Liberty or just over the border in Indiana. I've been on site in these places. This is something that, frankly, I'm very well qualified for and have a proven track record of being successful at. It's about delegation. It's about making command-level decisions and moving forward in a timely manner.
Matt Bevan, Republican nominee for governor, thanks for being here. We appreciate it. And our other candidates to come in the weeks ahead, and we thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. Hope you'll be along for the bright and early edition of WKYT this morning. We start at 4:30. Have a good week ahead.